picking out a song. Could y'all hear that? He was talking about Jill. She's gone into foster care and doing pretty good. Oh, by the way, Tiffany, had you got any late information on John Robinson? No. Okay. Well, and was told just a minute ago that Bob Walker had a fever. They took him to the doctor, and they discovered he has pneumonia in one lobe of his lungs. So he's being treated and improving. Haven't heard anything. Bob Mechanic was here Sunday, so he's obviously making progress. Uh, you've probably seen the note about the funeral that's going to be coming up next week for Rudy. Yeah, when COVID hit, they were among those who that. Yeah, right. So, any other people we need to know about for prayers? I know there's two or three in there floating around, but I just can't grab hold of them right now. Yeah, yeah. Now is deployed. John is, I don't know what they call it anymore. They don't call it TDY, do they? Yeah, okay. Mike? You want to tell real quickly what's going to happen to her knee? So if she's able to get up a little bit, she's going to be like Chester on the old Gunsmoke show. She's going to have a stiff leg and walk until they take that out and then put a new artificial knee back into her. And Mike and I just talked about that, and I just don't know why I didn't think of it. It slipped away from me. Yeah. Since you and I are talking, you got a number for the song? 826. Yeah, you may be right about that. Who knows this song? 826. We got one old lady over here. She knows it. You may have a duet. And Brother Ray, would you lead us in prayer after the song? Amen. All right, we are in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, chapter 6. Everybody with me? And we have, what do I do with my phone? Did I leave it in the car? Is my phone back there? Anyway, sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead. If it makes a noise over there, I'll go look for it. But that's you? I can hear that. Yeah, but we're hearing it off of her phone. Hang up. All right, forget it. All right. One of the things in our first question that I think is important for us to realize is that this is not a diary. It's not a journal. It's not something that Daniel was going in and writing, everything that happened over a short period of time. And you note the difference in where we are now in chapter 6 is nearly 70 years after chapter 1. So, based on the idea that Daniel was probably a teenager when he was captured and hauled off as one of the best and bright that Nebuchadnezzar wanted to save and make his kingdom better, approximately how old would Daniel be at this point? Yeah, he's likely in his 80s. He's not a spring chicken. So when, if you're from your Sunday school days, if you saw any studies about Daniel, he's always a young man, Shadrach, Meshach are walking around in the fiery furnace, and Daniel's a young man, with the lions, and we just envision Daniel as this whole thing being a young man. But it's not. So we need to understand that, and in the course of what we were talking about last week, you remember the queen mother went to her son and said, "There's a wise man that you need to talk to." He didn't even know about Daniel. He had to be told by an older person, in this case his mother, that said there's a man you need to talk to because he's got like communication with God, with his God, who tells him things and he interprets dreams. So the main thing I just wanted us to note there is the passage of time, not just that Daniel's an older man, which he is, but that this is not all encapsulated within a period of a few weeks or a few months. This is spread out over nearly 100 years. So, question 2, describe the organization of the government. The king, and then he had what? What do we call him? Yeah. Satraps. And anything else? What about Daniel's role?
There were 3 high officials over the satraps. One of them was Daniel, so he must have maintained his status in the interim between what we left off in chapter 5 and beginning of chapter 6, where Babylon was overtaken.
He was kind of brought back on stage by what happened last chapter, and he's apparently maintained that position. As a matter of fact, he's distinguished himself in such a way that what's going to happen? What did it say? Yeah, well, but why? Verse 3? Yeah, verse 3. He so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps that the king wanted to make him the number one go-to guy. And how'd that make the others feel? Yeah, jealous. Jealous. For several reasons. For one, they didn't get the promotion. Two, they were all had been equals, and now he's above them. So, you know, it's, in a way, you could almost call it human nature. Because if you're in an organization, whatever that organization or company might be, and somebody is promoted over you, that you thought you were better qualified, or you had a better background, or better education, or better experience, how do you feel about it? You know, you kind of get miffed. Well, they took it another step. They came up with a plan. Question 3. Comment on how a bad government is better than no government. Yeah. Even if it's bad, what do you have? Yeah. There's some order. You may not like it and may not be fair, but you at least sort of know what to expect.
If it's bad, you can correct it, but if there's nothing to correct.
Yeah, nothing to work with. If it's bad, at least it's organized and you've got maybe a chance to work on correcting that. How many have heard of the term no man's land? There you go. What does it mean? A place you don't go. How many of you know about the Oklahoma Panhandle? Ever seen it? Okay. Been there? Whatever. You know how it came to be? We'll forgive you. All right. Mason-Dixon line, yeah.
Yeah, that got drawn across, and then Texas, Colorado, Oklahoma got cut out of it, and it was just straight up criminals that ran them.
Yeah, they had the line that's going to be on the map, and below the line, slavery would be allowed. Above the line, slavery would not be allowed. And that line went right across that part of Texas and cut that strip off the Texas, what we call the Texas Panhandle. And nobody wanted it. They tried to put it in New Mexico. That didn't happen. They tried to put it in, what's that other state up there, Kansas. That didn't work. And finally, when they made Oklahoma, what was Indian Territory, a state, they brought in that no man's land. And for several years, that strip up there was a place without laws. And it was a wild and woolly place because they had no government except whoever was the biggest, meanest, best gun shot around. That was a no man's land. And the old people that wanted to go there were what? Yeah, bad guys. Well, maybe they came afterwards. Yeah, well, see, he came to support the law, but there wasn't any law in that period of time. And that's an example of a place with no government. So even bad government is better than nothing. I mean, you know, even in bad government, if you do something that's against their laws, you're going to get punished for it. It may be what we would consider an unjust punishment, but you know, you're going to, what is it? What's the thing about thieves? Anyhow, they all got their own law, and you know, you break the criminal's law, whatever it is. Honor among thieves, yeah. There was an old movie called The Comancheros with John Wayne, and somewhere in the beginning of the movie, they were hanging a man. And it was a rather crude hanging. Basically what they did was string him up, let him hold on to the thing, so it took him hours to die. But the head guy said, "We're thieves, and we cannot tolerate thieves who steal from us." So this is their own group, and the man stole something. So anyway, what's Daniel talking about? What's he living in? He's living under a bad government from his perspective, because he came from Israel, and he's now been hauled off out of his country, as have many of his fellow countrymen. So the point here is that government is good even if it's bad. It has some of a role, a good role and a purpose within our lives. And when we come later into the New Testament and we read that God ordains government, sometimes people read that and they think, oh, well then God likes Hitler, God likes Stalin, God likes, no. No, God has ordained government, but not necessarily a good or bad president or dictator or whatever. So, anyone else care to share anything? Question 4. Contemplate as to the reason Daniel was not liked by the other administrators. We've touched on that. Anybody want to add anything to that? Share their method to get Daniel in trouble with King Darius.
They passed this law, or they wrote up this law, that everybody could only bow down and pray to King Darius. And they got the king to sign it. And the thing of it was, once it was signed, it was not allowed, they were not allowed to cancel it or anything like that.
Yeah.
Irrevocable, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that was the custom of the whatever back in this period of history. You recall it happened when Esther, remember what happened there? They put out a law, and how did the king correct the law? The law was that the Jews could be killed, and the king couldn't take that law back, so he passed another law which said what? They could fight back. Yeah, they could defend themselves. So here they have passed this law, and they take it to the king, and see, you and I come from a different position in history, plus our faith. But if someone came to you and says, we're going to pass this law where everybody has to pray for you, or pray to you for 90 days or whatever it is, what would you think? Yeah. 'Cause what are we going to do if somebody prays to us? They're flattering him. It's all flattery. It's like in his mind lifting him up to a divine position. And he swallows it. So he passes the law, signs the law. All right? Next. Well, I said, observe how this method is being used in our current social and political environment. Now, let's don't get too specific here, but
Okay, I'll speak up.
all right.
One of the things that most recently has been happening is they word propositions on the ballot in such a manner that it's very difficult to understand them. And if you vote for it, you are actually voting against it
Yeah.
because it is worded as a double negative or in some way to manipulate your mind because they know what they want and they're going to get it back for good.
Yeah. You have to study it before you get there, because reading it just cold, you can easily be deceived. Yeah. The double negatives and et cetera. All right. And we have reached a point where if you speak in opposition to sin, you are labeled as the bad guy. Yeah. A bigot, or whatever other names they can think of to tag on to you. And all you're doing is speaking in opposition to what is not only sin in the Scripture, but has been sin in our culture for 200 years. But now, all of a sudden, you're a traitor because you stand for that which is righteous. Same thing is happening here with Daniel. Daniel's told not to pray. All right, we've basically dealt on question 7. Let's go to number 8. Give the significance of the decree being in writing.
Can I go back for a moment?
Yes.
Not only was the decree that Daniel could not pray, put time limit on it, 30 days. 30-day period.
Yeah.
Daniel was not willing to forego his prayers for 4 weeks, 6 days.
And it's not a requirement anywhere in the Torah or in the Word of God, but it seems to have been his practice to pray facing in the direction of the temple. And he also opened the doors and the windows. Well, in that environment of that country, you need the ventilation. They didn't have air conditioning, so the likelihood is the windows or doors were open anyway. So when he prays, he's praying out an open window. People can walk by, they can hear him, possibly even see him. So he's not trying to hide, and they're trying to catch him. So that makes it fairly simple. They caught him. Good. Anyone else? Next question. Where were we? The decree in writing.
Did you cover number 7?
No, we talked about it. I more or less skipped it. His ego, his arrogance.
One commentary I read said, like Darius, y'all said Darius, but I ended up understanding they said Darius. Like we view this law as a way to unite the kingdom by identifying himself as sole mediator between people and their God.
Yeah. Anything to bring the country together as one, which is always a challenge in any government, is you have everybody in harmony. And so this could,
Sounded like a good idea.
sounds like a great idea. Everybody's going to be praying to me, and I'm then going to be praying to their gods, and that'll make us united. He would become like the funnel or the conduit, the concept here. Good. Anyone else? All right. No one's responded yet to the sense of the writing. There's a couple of verses there to refer to. Yeah, that's a good term, setting it in stone, meaning it's concrete, it can't be changed. It is in writing. King probably didn't write it, but he signed it or initialed it or had his scribe write it, but it's approved. And once it's approved, it's in the books. Supreme Court case number 45, docket 12, or whatever, it's there.
But the thing of it is, I don't think King Darius didn't really know what he was signing, or what the results.
Yeah, the long-term repercussions. And, you know, that happens even. All right, can you hear me now? Where were you? Yeah. The writing makes it real. And you know, in a sense, that's not an unknown concept even for us. There's some things in life that, like, we need to write down. Maybe some of our memories, maybe our statement of love or whatever. We need to write things down. And when you do write it down, makes it real. And that's the deal here. You put this in writing, and it's a law. It's not revocable, unrevocable. And it doesn't change. Yes, because, well, I thought he said, no, it's written. Yeah. All right, clarify the action of Daniel when he heard of the decree. Starting in verse 10. Yeah, that would be my understanding, that he didn't really act in a defiant way. He did what he always did. And that's why they knew they could trap him in this, because they knew what he always did. So like if you always do something, say you always go to the gym at 3 in the afternoon, and I need to catch you, where do I know I can catch you? At the gym at 3 in the afternoon, or wherever it is that you go, at the library at 11 or whatever. And so they knew when they had the king to pass this law, they knew they had him. So they're malicious, underhanded, mean, and ungodly. All right, looking at question 10. Let's talk about the differences between these two verses here, 5:11 and 6:14. First, somebody volunteered to read chapter 5, verse 11, and somebody else volunteered to read chapter 6, verse 14.
There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight, intelligence, and wisdom, like that of the gods. King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, I say, appointed him chief of magicians, enchanters, and astrologers and diviners.
Okay. Now, who's got 6?
When he heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him.
Okay.
I had trouble with this question. I wasn't sure what you wanted us to, how to correlate things.
Okay. Well, what'd you come up with?
Up to one side.
What?
I did too. Blank space. I couldn't figure out which was the one.
It shows that he had a relationship with Daniel.
Yeah. He had a relationship.
He liked him.
He liked him. He had been a wise source in the past.
And he was promoted.
Let's say you're a head of a company or a country, and your best advisor, all of a sudden somebody accuses them of a crime, and they're going to be arrested and taken away. And what are you losing? You're basically losing your brain. I mean, he's your best advisor. He's the one you listen to in times of trouble. But when you got a hard decision to make, he's the one you come to and say, help me figure this out. He liked him, respected him, and he definitely didn't want him to die. Anyone else? Do we fill in any blanks, or did you have something else you went in a different direction with? Because that's possible too, you know. All right, explain the harshness of the king's punishment. We're down to verse 24.
They got to visit the lions.
You know, I don't know whether anyone else broke this decree or not. If anyone else did, what do you think happened? You think that they were put in the den, and you said probably nothing? I go with probably nothing. Because they didn't care about anybody else. They only cared about who? Yeah, they weren't looking for anybody else except Daniel. Daniel was the only one they wanted to catch. And if 100,000 other people prayed to their idol, they didn't care. All they cared about was catching Daniel. And they did. And that's what evil people are like. They don't care who else does evil. They just want to find some way to catch their opponent in what appears to be something shady or questionable, where they can make accusations. And sometimes an accusation is all that's needed. And we see that going on in politics even today. You know, well, it happens on both sides. You know, it happens in both directions. Where they're accusing one another of committing some crime. Guilty or not, it's a shame that, you know, that's how we're trying to operate, and that's how we are operating. What happened with Daniel was obviously there's nothing fair about it at all. It was a stupid law that was passed for one reason, that was to get Daniel in trouble. But what it would have meant for Daniel, what would it have meant to Daniel if he obeyed the law?
He would be discarding God.
Yeah, he'd be turning his back on God and then doing what?
Supporting
Yeah, praying to a false god or praying to his king. Now, you know, there were many other Jews in the community because we know they'd already been captured and hauled up there anyway. So there are a lot of Jews there. What did they do? I don't know. It doesn't say. But Daniel was not going to deny his God or worship a false god, even though he knew it was against the law. And you think about how that has happened even in our current world today. You know, people in the Middle East and in some places there, they have to hide for their faith. They're like what we would call the early Christians, hiding in the catacombs, hiding in the tombs, the underground graves, in order to worship, because Rome would kill them if they, you know, went to church. They had an assembly that was public. And that's one of the blessings that, you know, we still have here in America, is that you can assemble publicly and worship. In other countries, even today, you can't do that. If they catch you, if they find you, you're history. You're going to prison. You're going to be killed. And it didn't matter to Daniel. He was going to worship God, even if it cost him his position or his life. Now, what if your company came up and said, anybody that goes to church on Sunday and worships Jehovah, God, or Jesus Christ is going to be fired? And we've got people watching every one of our employees. And so if you go to church on Sunday, don't come to work on Monday, because you won't have a job. What would you think about that?
I'd kind of be salivating because I know the lawsuit would
Yeah.
probably make money.
Except the courts at that point would probably side with the company rather than us. And that's what Daniel's facing here. And Daniel, again, he chose to worship God. Now, he's not going out and doing any big thing. You know, he's not having a rally in the park or anything like that. He's in his own house praying to Yahweh, facing Jerusalem. And that's worth losing his life, or that's enough of a crime to these people and to the decree. All right, what do you think about a harsh penalty? What's the reason for having a harsh penalty? Yeah. To discourage people from breaking that particular law. Make an example. Used to have public hangings, which I'm not sure it was necessarily an example to make people not, but it was certainly a spectacle. But I would say originally the idea was if we hang them publicly, maybe they won't rebel either. But making them an example, discouraging people from even thinking about it. I don't want to park in this handicap spot without my placard because it's going to cost me how much? At a minimum. At a minimum. And Sister Lois just forgot to hang her placard. And so when she ended up going to court, it still cost her nearly $100 to cover court costs, even though they didn't fine her. Because she had a placard, she just forgot to hang it on the rearview mirror. So that makes you pay attention. The harshness of the punishment sometimes makes people pay attention to things that otherwise they wouldn't think about. Now, let's bring this down. There was a discussion in a class earlier, a couple of weeks ago, about hell. We got all sorts of description in the Bible about hell. The truth of the matter is, we don't know. We've got some things that we're told, but they're all illustrations and metaphors. And as I've shared before, we cannot think beyond our vocabulary or our mental images. I didn't say that. Somebody else said that. Some smart person. So if I don't have the mental image or I don't have the vocabulary to describe something to you, Paul went up into third heaven and he came back and said, I can't tell you. I don't have the words to tell you. So what's hell like? I know one thing for sure. It's the absence of God. So there will be no good in hell. So whatever bad you can imagine, that's hell. Now, I know there are many preachers, particularly in my lifetime and before, that really preached on hell. I have seldom done that, but one time, one Sunday morning, back in the 70s, I preached a sermon on hell. And it just so happened, one of my elders was getting in his car to go to church, and his neighbor was out in the yard and spoke to him. And he said, why don't you come to church with us? He said, think I will. So he just got in the car and came to church. And I preached that sermon on hell. And he responded that morning, was baptized, was faithful for the rest of his life, converted his wife. The sermon on hell scared him, made him face the reality. So it's something we need to talk about. It's something that we need to be upfront about. And then we switch now, or we shifted to all we talk about is peace and love and joy and everything. And we almost forget the terrible consequence of hell because we're focusing so much on how wonderful heaven's going to be. But you really need both to have the good and proper motivation, I think. There is a value in knowing what the punishment's going to be. You swat the kid on the bottom. Say, don't do that again. He learned a lesson. And that's part of what life is about. And that's part of what Christianity is about that we understand. King Darius knew it. Did I say that right? The what? The right? Darius. Okay. I'll go with anything. I don't know phonics. Question 12. Recognize the king's emotional trauma. What is lacking in his decree? Verse 26 and following. Sure. Yeah, we may have a translation situation here. They didn't falsely accuse him, obviously. He broke the decree, they caught him, and he admitted to it, basically. Maybe the word unjustly would be better, because they set the whole thing up. It was a trap. They set the whole thing up. Maybe that's what it's about. They weren't fair, that's for sure, were they? I mean, from the very beginning when they had the decree formed, they convinced the king to do this, boasted up his ego, said it'll serve to unite the country or whatever. And yeah, they were behind it. Go ahead. Yeah. For such a minor, what's yeah. I would think that their issue was they wanted a capital punishment. They wanted to get rid of Daniel. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you touched on it in the beginning when you talked about the arrogance. And that's something we've mentioned repeatedly in this book. It's about the arrogance of the kings and in some way even of the Jewish people. Again, we have to go back and ask ourselves, why is this book being written? Who's going to read it? The Jews are. Well, is there a lesson they're supposed to learn? Yeah. It's about their arrogance and their pride, what it gets them into. You can see it in Nebuchadnezzar and Darius. Can you see it yourself? Most of the time we can't, but you're exactly right. All right, anyone else? Yeah. Now, he had not done anything. The action, in a sense, could be considered treasonous. It's treason. You're supposed to pray to the king and you didn't. So that's treason. You didn't salute the flag. You know, it's treason, whatever it is. And so it's a capital crime. And yet, when Daniel's called in, he said, I did nothing to attack the king or to attack the kingdom. Anyone else? Questions, comments, or remarks? Yeah. 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 And again, let's talk about the families. Why did he kill the families? Well, they'd be destitute, but in this culture, what's particularly if they got a son, what's likely to happen? Revenge. A kid may be 10 years old, but he knows what happened to his dad, and so he's going to grow up and become a rebel himself. And this is quite common in this period of history. You know, you don't want anybody coming back at you. So kill them all. Yeah.
Wasn't that the fate of Achan's too?
Yeah.
The entire family was
Right. Right. And again, as it was said earlier, it gives an example to anybody else who's watching. Maybe you don't care what's going to happen to you, but do you care what's going to happen to the rest of your family and those you love? And that's from a human standpoint of how these laws operate and how people function back in this period of history. Yes? Yeah.
He didn't bother to say, you know, hey, he said, I made a mistake, and God is in charge. I mean, they made a big impression, just like back when Nebuchadnezzar threw the other three into the fiery furnace.
Yeah.
He figured it out real fast.
And this is the teeter-totter of this whole book about who's most important, which God is most important. The lesson is for the Jews, and the answer, of course, is Yahweh, Jehovah. Good. Anyone else? And again, Daniel's thrown in the lion's den, and all I would remind you is what I said in the beginning. When you see that young kid in the lion's den, remember he was probably an 80-year-old man with a long beard. Maybe not a beard, I don't know. But nevertheless, it's not a kid in the lion's den.
I found some interesting information, if I might share it.
Yes?
The commentary I read said, sealing the lion's den might have been a providence of God that Daniel's safety would be more plain.
Mm-hmm.
The angel, that was what saved, well, anyway. And the signet ring's seal kept the enemies from killing them. They would not break that seal
Right.
to get into.
Yeah. Someone dies under mysterious circumstances, we immediately want to know what happened. And did someone sneak in and die, kill them? Well, here, Daniel's in the lion's den. They want him to die, but the thing is sealed probably so nobody would rescue him. But the truth of the matter is, it kept them from being able to say someone came and saved him or killed him.
They wanted to ensure that he died.
Yeah.
So it was not beyond them to, if the lions didn't get him, they're gone.
It's my understanding that they didn't feed those lions well and they were supposed to eat him right away, but you never know.
I found something interesting about the lions. The lion's den were lions that had been captured and later were released and hunted for sport.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
All right. And these are most likely were not African lions with the big mane. They're probably what you and I might call a puma or a mountain lion, something like that. They were in the lion family. But nevertheless, get a couple, three of them together, they can be pretty vicious. I'd hate to have to try to fight them. Wouldn't be anything I'd want to do. Anyone else? Questions, comments, remarks? All right, you backed us up, back to verse 26. What's lacking in his decree? All right, you said believe. Okay. Anyone else?
well, in this whole sentence, paragraph of this, I did not find the word pray.
Okay. No mention there of prayer. Anyone else? Trust. Okay. I think all of these suggestions are good, but what I'm seeing, the issue that really needs to be here on the part of the king. All right, at this point, what's the difference in the king's position and Daniel's position? What's the difference in the king's position and Daniel's position? Yes. There's only one God. And the king is saying he's one of the good gods. He's making progress, but he's not there yet. There is but one God, and that's the message of that's Daniel here and of the book. There is only Yahweh. Sounds like he's getting pretty close.
He's saying, hey people, this isn't an idol. This is the God.
All right. And you're right about translation. They didn't use capital letters, and many times the articles are something at the end of the word, or it can be an issue. But nevertheless, he's close. He's getting in the direction. But for me, I don't think he's quite coming out as strong as he needs to. Question 13. Specify the lesson for the Jews in this story and the application to disciples today.
I think it's funny,
I'll take it back there. 7.
they, when I was in high school, they talked about the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and when you read it when you're 12 years old, it's an action story, and then when you read it again, it turns into satire, political commentary,
Mhm.
commentary. And this, like, I've heard this story so many times, but like this is political backstabbing, and so he was basically the highest one, and because they were jealous, they decided to kill him. And the whole time I was thinking, and you talk about arrogance, how that would have been a lesson for the Jews, because that was the audience. And then the other thing is, if you read it, like this is exactly like the Pharisees and the Sadducees. But they weren't kings. They were the religious leaders of a failed nation.
Yeah.
And they were so offended by that they were willing to have Christ crucified. So you had political backstabbing, arrogance, and then and like being eaten by a lion and being crucified. Those sound horrible. And that was just because of ego. They were willing to have someone tortured to death.
Yeah.
Um,
Good.
so,
Right.
sounds
Good. Wonderful. Anybody else want to share anything? Got to come back now. Philip? All right. Philip's with the Border Patrol. How long are you going to be here?
till September.
Okay, fantastic. Welcome. Glad to have you with us. Again, yes, it's a historical book in one sense because it tells us something about history, but it's not a historical book in that that's not its purpose. The purpose is to deliver a message, a lesson. And the question is, what lesson is it for the Jews and what lesson is it for us? You got 2 minutes. Go on. Be faithful unto death. Good.
Song in our hymn book, and one of the main things it says is God will take care of you.
God will take care of you. All right. Good. Good. Anybody else?